is springing upon us, which may not be welcome, certainly not by the Caesars of this age. And what we, a new Joshua generation, must do, in my opinion. That's what they taught us how to say in homiletics. In order to, we're leaving the truth now and we're getting down to the preacher's opinions, which of course you may disregard or sleep through as you prefer. By the way, the business about the Christian church without instruments, the Christian church with instruments is called the Disciples, and the Disciples also sent us to the Philippines, probably because they had no in with the administration to deport us to the Philippines, but never mind that. The first sign of our God time is the chilling recognition that the old order has changed, yielding place to the new, and God is fulfilling God's own self in so many new ways, lest the good old customs should corrupt our brave new world. We are called by this generational shift to be all that we can be, not what the last generation was or thought it was or the spinmeisters tell us it was. And I'm from that generation, so I can speak that way. There's an objectivity that's almost ruthlessness that our Joshua generation must have if we are to be God's people in our not-so-brave new world. Nothing is sacred anymore. Nothing. Everything is on the table. And individuals, and churches, and entire societies, and yes, even the world, is all seated at the table. It's happening everywhere at the same time, and the time is now. The corruption of the old customs, the old ways, the old arrangements that may have been beneficial in the day of a Moses generation, when you were leaving slavery, leaving a slave mentality between your ears, are no longer appropriate. And here you are, brand new, in a new generation. Let me suggest a few old customs that I think just have to go. Pardon. Racism anywhere. Starving children everywhere. Sexism anywhere. Lack of clean drinking water anywhere. Homophobia everywhere. Sick people without health care everywhere. Xenophobia anywhere. A lack of a liberating education system anywhere. War anywhere. In a world, in a word, the weary old order is rotten, rotten to the core, lying on the ground and disintegrating into its primary elements. And we're in charge of a new crop. A second sign beyond this objectivity that is required of us to be all the new Joshua generation can be is a stern commitment to prioritizing goals and focusing our energies on each in turn. There is a tendency to dissipate our efforts in this modern age through mindless multitasking, which I don't encourage on US 19, because if you're drinking coffee, driving at 60 miles an hour, 4 lanes of traffic, and talking on the phone at the same time, you're either not going to get where you're going, or you're going to not get anywhere fast. And that's the way it goes. We wind up in the ditch. When the original Joshua generation invaded the land of promise, first they set up a base of operations at Gilgal and had prayer before the slaughter, if you will. And then they started immediately with Jericho, and then went to Ai, and then to Gibeon, and then they rolled up the rest of the cities all the way to the north to Jezreel by the numbers, one at a time, in seriatim, building an army identity, army capability all at the same time, getting into the habit of doing the right thing. Of course, God had to help them a little bit to get started as well as along the way. And at that point, they had earned the right to go and do something else, which they needed to do, disperse to their own tribal homelands and learn how to live in peace, because that was a part of the Joshua generation's goals. Outnumbered, on unfamiliar terrain, and faced by long-entrenched allies of Egypt, the same place that they'd just gotten out of, this original Joshua generation prioritized, concentrated their forces, and then took Canaan by the numbers. A third, and to you probably something you hadn't really thought about, important sign that's required to be all the Joshua generation can be is joy. How can joy, with all this stern commitment to priorities and an almost ruthlessness in determining what to do, how can this be a sign of the inbreaking of God's rule in a world that will, to say the very least, resist God's rule with tooth and claw? Are we doomed to be some kind of happy warriors who, in Wordsworth's word, doomed to go in company with pain and fear and bloodshed, turn necessity into glorious gain? You betcha, as a late great candidate said. We are called to play some really hot riffs and some really jazzy licks as we march around the walls of the modern Jerichos of this world. When Kathy and I were being trained, if you can train people like us, to be missionaries by the UCC and Disciples Board of World Ministries, we were privileged to hear the great Chilean father of liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez, at that point in his late 70s. And at the end of a magnificent lecture, there came a time for questions. Now, to that point, we had heard the stories of the calls of our fellow classmates. Some were called by the motivation to duty, or a sense of a great world need, or a duty to God, to please God. The list was extensive and as personal as only such calls can be. Yet none of them seemed to speak to me personally or to my call, so I asked Gutierrez, what is the single most important motivation for a missionary? He didn't miss a beat. He said, joy. And seeing my shock and amazement, because I kind of was in the happy warrior Wordsworth mode, I'm going, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going, that kind of thing. He said joy. He added, after all, it is good news, isn't it? Well, talk about getting your entire plate filled and given spoons and forks and knives to go with it. This 21st century Joshua generation, the signs of the time in which we live call us to this commitment to change, to personal, institutional, systemic change, in realizing our God's rule that we just sang about in our land of promise. The signs also call us to a high discipline of concentration and prioritizing of energies toward effectiveness in meeting each and every aspect of these needed changes, that we may help all of God's tribes here and everywhere be settled in the shalom peace for which they were created in their own homelands. Finally, the signs of this scary, chaotic, and corrupt time require our Joshua generation to go out with seeds of joy so that we may return with our baskets full of Eden fruits, peace, and justice.